Hey, what's up, guys? So, sorry that I haven't given an update in quite a while. I promise I've remained busy, but I've, believe it or not, been working a lot on procedural aim offsets and weapon inverse kinematics for a true first-person setup. And if you saw my tutorial series where I used control rig to try and make a procedural aim offset and uh, have the arm inverse kinematics, um, there's a few flaws in that. So a lot of it, the flaws are just inherent with control rig. Basically, um, the main issue with it was, first of all, it just wasn't accurate. Like, if you just remove the inverse kinematic corrections, you'll see that the weapon's just going to be moving quite a bit. And secondly, and more importantly, whenever you applied any form of offset, like if you applied like a crouching animation, like I'll just show right here, like if I just set this crouch value to 1, what would end up happening is you see for this crouching animation how the pelvis position changes a lot and he's basically just turned like 90 degrees or something. What would end up happening with that blueprint implementation that I made was your whole body would just turn 90 degrees because it would have no idea what the base pose is that you're trying to achieve originally is. So whatever you pass through it will just be whatever it works off of. And there's no way around that in control rig. So I created, and this took way longer than I originally anticipated and was much more complicated, but the outcome was surprisingly just pretty much perfect in my opinion. Where now you can just apply a animation pose to your node. This is the pose that it should derive from, the spine rotation and your camera rotation, and it should just work. The rest of these, there's many more pins that I've implemented into this node particularly, that aren't exposed right now, but the rest of these are just for other things like just your procedural like recoil and aim down sights location, aim down sights value. Those aren't really necessary. And in fact, I've even separated the aim offset as its own node, so I could just quickly show this off. So let's just do this first of all. So for the aim offset portion of my true FPS setup, and by the way, just a disclaimer, this actually works in any setup. So it can work in third person, just a standard first person, a true FPS first person, and in fact, I believe it should work in VR too, which I'm really excited about. All you need to do is just offset your root location by the amount that the aim offset offsets your head, so that the head always remains at the right location relative to your VR headset. And I might create an additive node for that, but anyways, so this procedural aim offset, you'll see that it has multiple values. These are the spine values, and you can apply whatever spine bones you want in here and their weights. And if you have the weights all adding up to 1, you should look in the exact direction, no matter what, that your camera rotation is relative to your mesh. And by the way, just to show it off really quick, so the anim pose I'm passing in here is the same one that I'm using over here, but if I just make this nothing, you'll see that it does not work properly because it believes that the base position that it's trying to achieve is just the reference pose. So you have to pass in whatever your base pose is here, and then everything should work perfectly. So, so using this, it should add up to the correct rotation, and since I'm only passing the spine, which are directly connected to the arms, and that's adding up to 1, it should just track completely perfectly with your camera. So just to show that really quick. So as you see here, there's no inverse kinematic arms correction. It's just completely static on the screen, and it might even just look like you're using a standard FPS setup with the arms mesh directly connected to the camera. But as you can see, I can look down and see my body. And if you look at the other perspective, you'll see that it's actually rotating about my camera, and the uh, weapon really is just static on my screen. And in fact, you can apply roll values to the camera as well, and you'll see that with roll values, it'll actually kind of um, uh, have a leaning effect. So I bound that to some input, and it does rotate the roll of the camera a little bit, but it doesn't actually just completely roll the camera. Otherwise, it would look exactly as it is on the screen while you roll. But you can see I'm applying some roll here, and it's aligning completely perfectly. And you'll see that if I apply like crouching or something, no matter what, like just so you could see on the third person perspective, when I crouch, I'm still looking directly at him no matter what, because the spine corrects for whatever position um, the accumulative offset is. And the way the accumulative offset is calculated is at the moment based off of the last index here. And also something else that you could do with this that took me a while to be able to add is that you can play montages just fine on top. So I can add like a reloading animation, and it, no matter what perspective, no matter what angle you're looking at, it should always stay centered on the screen. This isn't really a good example because this reloading animation kind of just goes off the screen, but it should remain centered at the screen at all times, and it lines up completely accurately. Like, you'll see that he's grabbing at the magazine location no matter where I'm looking. And by the way, he's not grabbing exactly there because of the way that I placed it in the hands, but that's besides the point. No matter what animations you add, montages, it should just work. And so now that we got the just standard procedural aiming out of the way, now let's look at what it actually looks like with the whole rig. And with the whole rig here, this basically is the combination of the uh, procedural aim offset here and another node, and it also combines the arm inverse kinematics, but you don't want to use the two nodes separately if you're going to have a true first person setup, because using this one has a few drawbacks that I'm not going to go into detail about. But basically, in a nutshell, you can't play montages on top of it. It basically just locks them into position. So you want to use this node if you want to apply procedural aim offset and the arms inverse kinematics. And you'll see that with the same setup that I had in the tutorial series, and I may update that just to show off the differences, or just create a new tutorial series to just show off how to use this, because I am probably planning on releasing this as a plugin if anybody wants it. I'm not sure what the demand is for this kind of thing. I haven't seen anything like this in the market, honestly. But this is what it looks like overall. And you'll see that aiming and leaning all works. You know, it's aligned perfectly. I can crouch, still lean. And also you'll notice that with this walking animation here, that the pelvis is moving a lot. Like, now it's aiming forward, now it's turning to the right, but no matter what, the spine compensates for that. And what this means is that in other games, what you basically have to do is you basically need a massive state machine for, you know, every single weapon in your game, right? That has an aim offset, a locomotion blend space, and if they don't match, then your weapon won't be pointing forward because they weren't added correctly. And what that means is that you need to buy a bunch of animations. This is what I used to do, but that's what basically ended up making me go down this kind of rabbit hole, is that I kind of hated doing that, and it looks really ugly as well, having just a massive state machine. So this procedural aim offset system solves that, and you can basically just have one locomotion blend space for every weapon and just plug it into your procedural aim offset node, and everything should just work. So crouching, this crouching animation is not designed for this. In fact, I'll just quickly show you. If I just completely bypass this node, you'll see how bad everything looks. Besides the fact that there's no, procedural offset and you can't actually look up, this is what will happen if you use like your own sort of implementation without a reference pose, is that when I'm walking around, you'll see that based off of the uh, pelvis position, how much the weapon is swaying, and when I crouch, the weapon completely moves to the side, and yeah, it just looks horrible in general. And that's what most implementations of procedural aim offset nodes do, because they don't pass in a reference pose, which adds a lot of complexity as well. And in here, you can individually change each blend weight. Here, it does not actually all add up to 1 towards the arms. Um, because some of the blend weight is going into the neck and the head, which aren't connected to the arms, and that means that the arms themselves are actually compensating. So they move into position, and basically that means you can just bend your spine basically 90%, and the arms will do the rest of the 10%. And in fact, I could just show you, if I just turn a lot of these weights to 0, you'll see that the spine bending will look a lot different, but also the arms will be doing a lot more of the work. And I won't actually be looking in the right direction because it's not adding up to 1, so he's not going to look at the right location. It's going to be whatever percentage of the blend weight you put in there is. But yeah, as you can see here, the arms will still move. This kind of looks horrible because the spine isn't bending enough, so the arms are doing too much work and it's having to move a lot. And so that's making it so it's having to compensate a lot. And another thing that I've added is, as you can see, if I like turn over here, you see the weapon gets closer. That's because rather than having the left hand just start floating because it can't reach that far, once it reaches a certain threshold of reaching distance relative to its max reach distance, it'll actually start pulling the weapon back. So you never have like a floating hands issue, which is in a lot of different inverse kinematic setups. And you can even change that as a variable. Right now it's at 98% of the reaching distance. And here, let's just fix this really quick. Here there's a ton of different variables, so it can just work right out of the box. You can make it as simple as you want or as complicated as you want. You don't actually even need any of these necessarily, just the camera rotation and the animation pose. But one that I found that was really useful is I basically made an aiming joint influence, basically the elbow position relative to aiming. And so right now it's at 50%, but if I just set it to 100%, you'll see that the way that I calculated the joint position is based off of the pose you pass in, and it just directly grabs the elbow position. So the inverse kinematics elbow position isn't at some arbitrary location like what I did in the blueprint rig. This one is actually 1-to-1 with whatever you pass in, so the inverse kinematic version of this won't look any different from whatever you pass in. But when I aim, it's going here. Notice how much the elbows move. It's moving 1-to-1 with the weapon offset that I'm moving at, and it kind of looks horrible with the pistol. That's because the joint is just moving like 1-to-1 with the location of the weapon. And if I set this to 0, then no matter what, the joint position should just be wherever the non-aiming position was. So you'll see now it's just going to stay as static as possible. It has to move a little bit though, just to get there. And this looks a little better, but I think 50% looks the best. And there's a bunch of other different variables that I don't want to get into at the moment because it can get pretty complicated. But one thing that I'm planning on changing is, at the moment, the way that it calculates the accumulative offset, like when I crouch, how it knows, or when I play an animation, how it knows like where what the reference position should be is it calculates it based off of the last bone that you pass into the spine array, but I should probably set this as a separate thing. So right now the head is what is uh, to remain static, and the rest of the body will compensate. So just to show that off really quick. And by the way, the animation should still look pretty much the same, but they're just a little bit different because the it's trying to keep the head steady basically. So when I start reloading, you're gonna see that the head may change location, but the rotation of the head does not change whatsoever. And the animation and the actual base animation, the head is changing rotation, but it's basically enforcing here that the head will not change. And by the way, you can also reload and aim, and it'll just keep it steady in place. You should probably set the aiming value to be like 50% when you're reloading, so it doesn't just stay steady on, because that just doesn't look right. But if I just add to the array really quick, and let's just set it to be the pelvis, this will be the actual bone that is to remain static, and everything above it can just do whatever it wants. And I set the blend weight to 0 because we don't actually want the pelvis to move, otherwise it'll rotate the whole body. But you'll see here now when I reload that it's actually just pretty much playing the animation the exact same, at least from the pelvis up. So the upper body is playing the animation just as it originally was, and the head is not remaining steady. It's only the pelvis, so the pelvis is not moving at all. It would have moved otherwise with the other animation, or if you just plug the animation in directly, the pelvis would move. And this looks pretty good too. But depending on the kind of game you want, you might want the head to just constantly remain looking forward, just to make it so that everybody can see where you're aiming. And crouching and everything still works. It's not applying any offsets to the upper body, and that's because the crouching animation is only being played from the pelvis down anyways. So that still works completely fine. But if you had like a crouching animation that you played all the way up to like the head or something, you would want to make the reference, the static bone, basically the head, so that it doesn't move too much everything else. And all of these recoil animations are procedural offsets as well. They're just being passed into the offset transform over here. Oh yeah, one other thing is that, so just to show that this does work in not just a true FPS setup, but this should work as a third-person mesh or a VR mesh or something. Should work in any orientation as long as the anim pose and the camera relative rotation are passed in correctly. It should just work anyway. So I quickly created over here a third-person setup. So if I just switch this around, I could just show you that everything still functions exactly the same, and this might be a good thing to have for a third-person setup, so you still don't need that massive state machine like I mentioned. So you see everything's still functioning, looking up and down still works. You can rotate. You can have leaning, still works. Yeah. Alright, so that's all that I've got to show for this preview so far. Not sure what I'm going to do with this. I think I'm going to release this as a plugin, but I'm not sure how many people are actually interested in this. So let me know if this is something you guys want. And that's all that I've got for today. So I may update you guys on whatever I add to this, but as it is right now, it's pretty much complete. So Yeah, besides that reference for the static bone, I should probably separate that. All right, that's all. See ya.